Hi, I'm interviewing my 87-year-old grandfather, Fred Young, on his memories of World War II. How old were you, and where were you living during World War II?
At the time of Pearl Harbor, I was 1 month shy of my 14th birthday. As far as the Americans were concerned, they were not too concerned about the war in Europe. They didn't want any part of it. But once Pearl Harbor was bombed, we were in it. And I remember because I was listening to the New York Giants on radio in my living room, and several of my aunts and uncles were in the kitchen. They had a little family gathering that Sunday. So then they came in with the news that Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, was bombed by the Japanese. So I ran into the kitchen and I said, hey, Hawaii got bombed. And then my aunt said, do we own that? And then so I said, I don't know, who owns Hawaii? We didn't know. It was a different world then.
Yeah.
So my uncle said, oh yeah, Billy is there. Billy was my cousin, and he had enlisted in the Army prior to this, and he was stationed at Fort Shafter in Hawaii. So that's how we knew that Hawaii is American. But once we got the news, which was days later, which came on in the newspapers, how terrible it was and how many were killed, the American people were furious. If we had the atom bomb then, Americans would have wiped Japan off the face of the earth. That's how they felt, so very strongly about it.
Where were you living during this time?
At that time in Queens, in New York.
What are your recollections about World War II?
Well, that was the first major one. And then we didn't have television. You didn't have the radio reports. It's not up to date. You got the news from the newspaper, and usually that was day 2 or 3 days later after the fact, so you didn't know what was going on until the newspaper would tell you what was happening. So, and they would come with the major things like Doolittle's raid over Tokyo. That was big, I guess, when that happened. And then we thought at the time, well, that's great. I guess we're going to continue to bomb Japan. We didn't know it was just a one-shot thing, you know, at the time. And I remember the Aleutian Islands being invaded, and the Japanese held 2 of our islands. And then shortly after that, the Army went in and took them back from the Japanese. But other than that, you got reports, which you come in from when we got into North Africa, and Patton was in there, and then you got reports of what's happening, how the fight against Rommel was going. You get those reports from the newspaper. But you lived your life. We were 3,000 miles away from anything here in the United States, so it was the war. In a lot of respects, was remote from us, except our men were dying. You know, that was the thing. So you had that interest, but you weren't. You just kept up with things. You lived your life, and you just kept up with things. You read the newspaper. Oh, this was happening. You know. So I remember one time we were bombing Germany, and it said Aachen bomb. Now, Aachen is a German city. I thought that was the funniest thing. That Aachen was bombed. I said, wow.
Do you have one memory in specific that was the most powerful during the war?
I guess there were several. Of course, Pearl Harbor was the main one, right? And Doolittle's raid was another. And of course, the invasion of Normandy, that was big.
Yeah.
That was a big one. Right. And what else? I guess when Rommel surrendered in Africa, that was another big moment. And of course, some of the things with the Battle of Iwo Jima, that was big when they raised a flag at Mount Suribachi. That was amazing. That was all the Americans felt that was great, you know, it just increased your pride. So each of the major battles in the Pacific, they were significant news. Okinawa, Guadalcanal. Then of course, the major thing being dropping the atom bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the end of the war. So those are significant things that I can remember. I was a teenager.
Did you know a family member or friend who served in the military during the war?
Yeah, with my cousin Bob.
Mm-hmm.
He was a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
He enlisted in the Army Air Corps. Excuse me. Prior to getting into the war. In fact, I think prior to the European War in 1939. And he desperately wanted to get into the Army Air Corps. So you had to have a perfect physical specimen to get in.
Mm-hmm.
So my aunt was praying, we were all praying that Bobby would pass the physical. And he did get in. He was a good pilot. He was trained at Pensacola, Florida. Then after Pearl Harbor came, he figured he'd get into the war, and he didn't. He was such a good pilot. They kept him down there for training other pilots.
Mm-hmm.
So he spent a good time down there training the other pilots. And he wanted to get into combat.
Mm-hmm.
So he finally got into combat. It was at that time he was flying, I think, B-17 bombers.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the squadron commander of that raid. It was over at Anzio. It was a city in Italy that we had invaded and gotten a beachhead to march into Rome. So it was over Anzio, he got shot down by the Germans, and he didn't leave the plane. They let everybody, he wanted everybody to parachute out first, but he never got out in his plane and crashed. He went down in flames. So that, of course, is a significant memory for me. It was a family thing.
Yeah.
You know. But he was a courageous man, a good pilot. The only thing they found of him was dog tags. I guess he got totally burned. And then, who else? Well, Bobby was the one member who got killed in the war.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So I guess when the war ended, and with Japan surrendering, we had a lot of parties. I went into Times Square, it was jam-packed with people.
Fun time.
Everyone was cheering, jumping around.
How did your life change during World War II?
Didn't change too much. As like I said, we were not directly affected.
Mm-hmm.
No, what happened is like the government rationed food or gasoline and stuff, so you had to get ration cards.
Mm-hmm.
And the ration cards for gasoline, ration cards for sugar, ration cards for meat.
Mm-hmm.
You know, depending on the size of your family, you got so many tickets you could cash in each week. You know, and that was a change. But there's some other things that skipped my mind that what happened then. Oh, I remember when the Germans fired the V-2 rockets towards New York,
Mm-hmm.
and they were set for 3,000 miles. But Werner von Braun, who was the chief scientist there for the Germans at, I think it was Peenemünde where they let the rockets go. He set the charge for 1,500 miles, so they would fall in the ocean. So what happened when our radar picked up the rockets coming, so there was all sorts of air raid sirens and everything else, and I lived down by the ocean, so the next day they had anti-aircraft batteries at almost every block. It was the entire length of the Rockaway Peninsula, and the ammunition was all stacked up. And I said, "What's going on? You know,
Yeah.
why are all these soldiers here and all this anti-aircraft?" And they thought, well, German rockets were coming over, but they didn't. I did see, and the Germans had brought their, I'm bringing some of my memories down of the war, but they'd bring the submarines up close. And in the beginning, we had no defenses. Because our planes, we didn't have bombs, our planes would fly over. Because my cousin Bob told me to fly over to see the German subs there, nothing they could do. No bombs.
Yeah.
So they would sink the ships coming out of New York Harbor close to the land. And the papers were keeping track of all of this. So many ships sunk. And they got up to about 1,500 ships were sunk. And I guess it was from 1941, I guess it was down towards the beginning of the summer of 42. They said no more information on the ships because people are getting very discouraged. You know, because the Coast Guard would go out in the morning and take the bodies of sailors and all that washed up. And make sure they thought people went in swimming. I think one day I was going to school, and all of a sudden there was this tremendous explosion. The ground shook. And what happened was that the Germans had come in close to New York Harbor and torpedoed a destroyer coming out of New York Harbor, right off Rockaway Point. So I guess the explosion just, the enormous explosion. So it sunk our destroyer there. But after that, I guess we got more ammunition. We were able to sink the German subs, because I remember one time I was at the beach, and I was working as a cabana boy or something, and I saw our planes came out. Floyd Bennett Field was a field in Queens, that was a Navy field, and planes were coming out, and I saw them go out, and they were dropping depth charges in the ocean. You see them splashing up, going after a German sub.